And welcome to this session of the Igniting Hope pre-conference series. Today we're focusing on home and health, building stable foundations in Buffalo, New York. My name is Kim LeVere, and I'm from Clementine Gold Group, and we are delighted to be working with the team for Igniting Hope. Um, because to us, housing is more than just a shelter. It's a cornerstone of health, opportunity, and community well-being. So, over the next hour and change, we'll explore why that connection matters and what it looks like right here in Buffalo. But first, I wanted to kick it over to Pastor George, so that he could say a few words about the upcoming conference.
Yeah, Kim, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for uh, logging on tonight. We're coming into the stretch run for our eighth annual Igniting Hope conference, and this year's conference is going to be special because we're really focused on finding solutions and putting together a strategic plan so that we can uh, begin to create the kind of community that we all can enjoy a quality of life. We have documented over the last, really the over the last decade, the dramatic health disparities that exist here in Buffalo, especially in the African American community. But we have our work has taught us that if we focus on five things, five of the social determinants of health, and how they're interconnected, we can put ourselves on the path for health equity for all. And those five things are literacy, literacy slash education. Without having a good education, it's going to be very difficult for you to get a good job, to make some good money, and that moves us into our second one, employment. We want to make sure that everyone in our community is is employed at their maximum capacity. So if they're unemployed, getting them employed. If they're employed, but getting them skills so that they can move up on the skill ladder so they can make more money. Three, housing, and that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. We believe that everyone should live in quality, affordable housing, safe, quality, affordable housing. Four, everyone have access to primary care that's culturally competent and that is effective. And five, everyone have access to healthy, affordable food. And all five of those work together. And if we can, and we're going to, it's not if, when we begin to start working on those things collectively as a community and be solution oriented. So tonight, our focus is around housing. One of the underlying themes of here at the Buffalo Center for Health Equity is we believe that we need to focus on fixing the housing where people are already living. Dr. Henry Taylor has showed us that the quality of housing on the east side of Buffalo is not to where it should be, and it can cause many health problems. And so there's a lot of health problems that are attached to poor housing. So tonight we have some great panelists that are going to share with you their ideas on how we can achieve those goals of making sure that everybody in our community is living in a safe and affordable home. So I'll pass that back off to you, Kim. And again, thank you for joining us tonight. And we look forward to seeing you Community Day on September 19th and for Igniting Hope 8 on September 20th.
Thank you, Pastor. So today's agenda, what we'll cover is first, I'll introduce our amazing panelists, and then we'll ground ourselves with some working definitions and background on housing as a social determinant of health. Then we'll take a closer look at the current state of housing in Buffalo and Erie County. And then finally, we'll open the floor for Q&A, where our panelists will be able to respond to any questions or reflections. So today we are fortunate to be joined by four distinguished leaders in the housing area. We have Essen Sweat, Executive Director of the East Buffalo Development Corporation, Sarah Wooten, Director of Community Research at the Partnership for Public Good, Maggie Hamilton Winship, Associate Broker with Windsor Turner, and Daniel Corbett, who is the Associate Director of Housing Opportunities Made Equal. Each brings deep knowledge and experience to today's conversation, helping us see housing not just as real estate, but as a driver of health equity. So before we dive deeper into housing, let's just take a step back to consider the broader framework, social determinants of health. These are conditions in which people live, learn, work, and age. They shape everything from, chronic illness to life expectancy. Housing sits alongside other crucial factors like Pastor mentioned, education, workforce, access to healthy foods, and access to primary care. We found when one of these pillars is unstable, health outcomes are at risk. So, what do we mean by housing in this context? We're talking about safe, stable, affordable, and well-maintained places to live, free from displacement or harm. When housing meets this criteria, it becomes a foundation for thriving, and without them, people face instability, stress, and risk. So housing instability takes many forms, whether it's struggling to pay rent, overcrowding, frequent moves, or living in poorly maintained units. These conditions aren't just inconvenient, they directly affect our health. They can increase, the risk of chronic illness, injuries, or mental health challenges, create barriers to accessing care, limit access to necessities, whether it's nutritious food, steady work, or a supportive social network. So in short, housing stability really can impact any of those health inequities. And one key driver there is cost burden. Households end up spending more than 30% of their income on housing, and that often leads to facing impossible trade-offs. So less money for healthy food or healthcare or education. Some are forced into unsafe units. And the severity of these impacts scales with income, meaning that those with the least resources are most likely to experience the greatest harms. And it becomes a cycle that really reinforces that inequity. So here we have the current state in Buffalo and Erie County. So we can take a look at where we're at today. According to recent analyses, 75% of eligible households don't receive federal rental assistance, not because they're ineligible, but because funding is limited. Over half of the households in Buffalo are cost burden. So that's the 51.4% that you see. And then on Buffalo's east side, 40% of residents spend more than 60% of their income on housing. These numbers tell a story of widespread housing insecurity, and for thousands of families, stability is out of reach, and the ripple effects show up in health disparities across our region. So today's session is a part of a broader journey. In just a week, we'll reconvene for Saving Ourselves, implementing a community plan for health equity at UB's Jacobs School of Medicine. So hope that you all can join us, and we will move over to our Q&A with our panelists. Uh, so to explore the profound impact on housing and individual and community health in Buffalo, um, we are going to kick it off first with a question. We'll bring it to the group. So what are the most pervasive housing challenges you see every day for Buffalo residents beyond just high rent? Can you speak to issues like tenant rights, displacement pressures, or the impact of discriminatory practices on specific communities?
I could probably jump in there and speak to some of those issues. You know, so at Housing Opportunities Made Equal, we're a civil rights organization that since 1963 has been working to promote the value of diversity and ensure that all people are able to live in the housing communities of their choice. And unfortunately, that's just not the reality for most of the members of our community. And certainly housing discrimination plays a major role in that. And folks are being denied fundamental opportunities to live where their means permit, where their heart desires, but they're being denied due to discriminatory reasons, either due to their race, their national origin, their disability status, their lawful source of income, and other protected characteristics. That obviously is a huge problem. But that kind of private action by private individuals, housing providers, real estate agents, etc., that is one issue. But we also see a real problem with systemic problems within our community as well. And what I mean by that is that we know that there's not enough affordable housing in Western New York. This has been a problem that's been developing for decades. We've been in an affordability crisis for year after year after year, and we're never going to build our way out of it. Building new housing is extremely expensive, it's time consuming, takes a lot of resources. We're in such a deficit that there's just no way that we could do that. It's just too expensive and too time consuming. So we need to open up the housing that we currently do have, that in many cases is unsafe, that's dangerous, that's poisoning the folks who are living there, either due to lead, due to mold, due to asbestos, or other serious contaminants that often have lifelong consequences. So we need to ensure that the housing stock that we do have, which I'm sure most of us know too, it's some of the oldest in the country. You know, it's the oldest housing stock in any major metropolitan region. So that brings a host of challenges as well, because we need to get that housing that's out there. We need to get it up to code, and that's time consuming and expensive as well. So, you know, we didn't get here overnight, and honestly, the result of where we are now, it's the consequences of public-private partnerships that have actively disenfranchised Black and Brown communities. I'm talking about systemic racism. I'm talking about communities that were redlined for decades. And we continue to see the consequences of those policies. You know, redlining was outlawed in 1968 with the passage of the Fair Housing Act. But the consequences of those policies continue to echo to this day and will for many years to come. So it's going to take a public-private partnership. It's going to take, you know, multiple efforts on multiple fronts to tackle these issues. So yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I see all those issues, and certainly there's no kind of easy solution to these problems.
Thanks, Dan. Sarah or Maggie, if either of you wanted to weigh in.
Sure, yeah, I can jump in. I think you mentioned evictions as a problem, forced moves in the city of Buffalo. PPG, we did a study we published it in 2020, and we were looking at 2017 and I believe 2018 data at the time. So it's a little bit outdated, but we see similar numbers now, that we have around 8,000 eviction filings every year in the city of Buffalo. And that puts us at a higher eviction filing rate than most other Rust Belt cities, as well as most other cities across the state of New York. And being forced to move for any reason, just causes a lot of different problems for people. So people are more likely to lose their jobs, around 10 to 20% more likely to lose their jobs. It really deeply impacts kids' education because, of course, sometimes they have to switch to a different school, or even if they don't move to a different school, they're behind on learning. And of course, it can also have major impacts in terms of homelessness. More than half of the people that we interviewed, so as part of the study, we interviewed people who were in housing court at the time facing an eviction case, and more than half of the people that we interviewed said, if I'm evicted as a result of this case, I don't have anywhere to go. And so we can imagine that some of those folks are going to be able to find, a couch to sleep on, and experience houselessness in that way, or may end up in a shelter, maybe potentially being separated from some of their kids, depending on what the shelters allow and how old their kids are. So it just has all of these kind of rebounding effects, negative health impacts.
I'll just add, so my background is really more kind of finance, and that kind of like system level infrastructure that we have to address these issues. And so I'm really excited to learn from my fellow panelists today. But Daniel, you mentioned a couple of things that I wanted to pick up on. Um, I think we'll have an opportunity to discuss redlining further tonight throughout the panel. But a lot of people hear redlining and they think ongoing consequences from the 1960s. But Buffalo actually had one of the most recent redlining settlements in the country, which was 2014. So this isn't even ancient history. So I just wanted to mention that. And then something else that I see a lot in my work where I'm trying to analyze things like area medium incomes and how much income can a person or a family afford to spend on housing. And there's all these rules and regulations depending on what funding source you're utilizing. Something that comes up over and over again, particularly in the city of Buffalo, is income level, right? So even within the systems we have, what the state says people can afford is more than what people can actually afford in certain neighborhoods in the city of Buffalo. So I'd love to unpack that further as well as we go. And then I also just wanted to mention, based on what Sarah was sharing about displacements, we definitely have a very, I guess, kind of, this probably isn't the right way to phrase it, but like a landlord friendly housing court system. And so the other consequence of that, in addition to on the tenant side, people getting evicted, is on the landlord side, property owners are allowed to continue to let their properties fall into disrepair. And then when we have an unfortunate event like the blizzard, buildings that shouldn't have completely been condemned become condemned because of deferred maintenance essentially. And so then people are evicted because of a climate disaster, right? So I think there's lots of layers to this onion. So I'm really excited to continue to explore.
Thank you. And can you share a real world example from your work that shows how housing instability, poor conditions, or high costs have impacted health outcomes? And this is open to everyone.
Yeah, I could just jump in again. And, you know, part of our work is just providing paralegal counseling to tenants, housing providers, everyone and anyone who has questions about their rights and responsibilities when it comes to housing. And a lot of that's just counseling folks when they're facing evictions. And just like, Sarah and Maggie were saying, we have so many evictions in Western New York, and it is certainly very landlord friendly. I would agree with Maggie's assessment. And a lot of times we talk to landlords who say, look, we don't have any rights. An eviction, though, it's kind of funny because an eviction is actually an expedited proceeding. It's a summary proceeding, but it's created by statute to actually make it faster than if you had to go to court under under normal conditions, and the actual legal term would be an ejectment. So this was an expedited, summary, sped up process for the express benefit of housing providers. So you can force somebody out of their home in a matter of weeks, as opposed to a normal court proceeding, which would take months, if not years. Litigation's extremely time consuming and expensive. For eviction court, you don't need an attorney. You have to follow certain procedural requirements. Did you give proper notice? If you told the tenant to leave, if they're still there beyond that, then you can evict them for holdover. So, folks who are facing evictions, their entire lives are put on hold. They can't hold down a job. They oftentimes, can't go to school. They certainly can't go to health care appointments. So their entire life is really turned upside down. And that has really dire consequences. So just the stress, we talk to folks all the time who were just told, hey, my landlord said I have to be out by, the end of this month. Can they do that? Is that legal? And sometimes it is, depending on the circumstances, but a lot of times too, housing providers unfortunately resort to illegal evictions and take the law in their hands. It is still a court process. You have to go through the courts. So you can't just be told, get out. You have to be out of here tomorrow. I want you and all your stuff out. But unfortunately, that happens. And I've heard horror stories about how housing providers show up and physically throw their tenants out. All their earthly possessions end up out on the street, and they lose everything. And of course, that has disastrous consequences long term for that family, who then at that point is desperate to get a roof over their head and oftentimes take whatever's available, which is usually unsafe housing located in areas that don't have access to resources or amenities. And the cycle is just continued. So it's a major problem, certainly.
Can I jump in? I'm sorry, I'm in a brick building, so my Wi-Fi is in and out. I did get the first question around what disparities, and forgive me if I repeat anything that anyone has said, but what I'm finding is when it comes to mitigation and abatement, there are these programs that are offered by the state, city, and county around lead. But if you apply for a program, you're in their system, and if you don't receive the funding, then in some cases, and I won't say which program I'm dealing with, they'll actually come out and fine that property owner because of the lead. So it's a weaponization of resources that are out. So you say the resources are available, but you don't track the property owner, especially in neighborhoods that largely don't receive these funds historically, to apply. Because if they apply and they don't receive the funding, then now they're essentially in the crosshairs of those that they were seeking help from. And so another form of redlining that's finding its way into the system that we're working with around grants. But then also I'm thinking of participating in other programs that provide the funding. And so say you get into a program that's going to support you in renovating the home or making it available. You come up against so many things with the cost. And if you have a program that's up to $75,000 or $50,000, it really doesn't, it's not in the bucket compared to what you actually need to make your home safe. And so they say, sure, you can always provide us the difference, the 50,000 or the $30,000, but that's not conducive for where our property owners are right now, specifically on the east side, at funding and having the liquidity to participate in these programs. Even though programs exist, they're not really fully accessible to the communities that really need it. And for me, I feel like it's a way of weaponizing, what needs to be done in terms of the lead and the safety, and using it as a way to either find folks and create a burden or keep them out of the programs that are available. So that's what I'm also finding around what's available out here. And then the next thing I wanted to share was, and maybe someone here has spoken about it, was the modular housing and all the regulations around modular housing and all the pushback. And I think that also is another part of the redlining situation, where we know that these tiny homes, these modular homes, these 80 auxiliary dwelling units, they're an alternate way for home ownership, and to be able to, someone I heard mention, we're not going to be able to build our way out of it. So yeah, we do need to take care of our current stock, but we also need to build new, but build affordable and make it accessible. And having all of this regulation around modular housing, around tiny homes, just unnecessarily. I mean, a lot of the concerns have been debunked over the years around safety and what have you. But these are all still ways to keep population Black population, minority population
Essence, I think you're breaking up there.
Let's go to somebody. We'll come back to Essence, please, Kim.
We'll come
I think-
back. Um, so I think for the group, if either of you wanted to answer as well,
Was I
or
frozen the whole time?
Yeah, I can jump in on the piece about, real world examples, and I'll talk more about this part later, but we have an sort of ongoing lawsuit against the city of Buffalo that Housing Opportunities Made Equal is also involved in. And as part of that, we have these different housing groups that are involved, but we also have residents, moms in the city of Buffalo who are signed on as plaintiffs. And we have 4 moms who signed on. And, to be honest, it wasn't too hard to find, people who were having these housing conditions issues. And out of the 4 moms, 3 of them reported having health issues as a result of their homes. 3 of them had issues with chipping and peeling paint. And 2 of those moms had kids who tested positive for elevated blood lead levels. And we know that lead can impact kids in terms of creating issues with their development and also causing behavioral problems and just a whole host of different issues for kids. And also different health issues for adults as well. So, how are those homes also impacting the adults in the home when that's not even usually what we think about in terms of lead poisoning. But, one of the tenants talked about how when their landlord was cited for lead, the landlord came over and started chipping away at the lead paint that was like right next to the kids' table where they were eating breakfast, because the landlord didn't know or didn't read the paper from the city of Buffalo that said that it has to be an RRP certified contractor who would know how to handle lead paint. Because for folks who don't know, you can't just chip away at it. That's just going to make the lead dust go everywhere. And kids are going to be more likely then to ingest it, right? You have to wet it down and make sure that it's cordoned off from everything so that it's not getting into people's systems while those repairs are being made. So it's just a rampant problem across the city of Buffalo, primarily because lead paint was outlawed around 1980, and most of our houses were built in the early 1900s in the city of Buffalo. So we just, it's happening everywhere, and it's impacting these families. And even the ones who weren't impacted by lead poisoning directly, their kids, they were, having respiratory issues, probably due to mold and other things in their homes, and bed bugs biting them. Like there are all these different health issues that we saw just in, the 4 people who were interested in signing on.
thank you, Sarah. When we think about sort of exploring barriers to that safe and stable housing, what do we think are the biggest structural or policy barriers to those options in Buffalo or even across Western New York?
I would say, structural barriers, our zoning right now is such a problem in that it really prevents or at least discourages the construction of new affordable housing, multifamily housing in communities throughout Western New York. You have zoning that really demands that any new construction is, in the form of single family homes, which is the most expensive way to build housing, with a certain setback from the road, there's just, anytime you try to build affordable multifamily housing, you run into all kinds of issues because, the zoning is there, and then you combine that with a healthy dose of neighborhood opposition, and sometimes that can be discriminatory, sometimes it can just be run-of-the-mill NIMBYism. So I'd really, encourage folks to support the development of affordable multifamily housing in their communities, wherever they may be, because it's an uphill battle anytime you try to construct new housing in Western New York, especially in, first ring and second ring suburbs. It's very, very difficult and extremely expensive.
Yeah, I'll just chime in on that. And I don't want to have a network issue, so I'm going to turn off my video because it just said low bandwidth. But in an effort to contribute something that may help reframe that conversation, I think there's a couple different things to unpack there. First of all, when you're talking about municipalities outside of the city of Buffalo, maybe smaller municipalities, towns, villages, there the narrative around affordable housing, people still are very behind on what does affordable housing mean. So that's one thing. Um, the second thing I would add to that is a lot of these smaller municipalities would actually greatly benefit from diversification of the um, properties that are assessed in their municipality. And what I mean by that is when you look at what a single family home is assessed for, even if it's a very nice single family home and very desirable, it's not going to nearly be worth what a small apartment building would be worth for the municipality. So as these conversations continue, I would like to see like a smart growth lens, reframing some of these anti-housing and anti-affordable housing conversations. Um, I would also like to add something I've encountered more so in the city of Buffalo, particularly on the east side. When we talk about NIMBYism, I think the conversation there should expand a little bit because there's a difference between multimillionaires suing People Inc. over an affordable housing project in the village of Williamsville and a group of longtime residents who haven't seen anything invested in their neighborhood over the last 50 years. And the very first thing that shows up is, a homeless shelter or an affordable housing project. And that can be scary. First of all, there hasn't been any change, period. And there's like a lot of distrust of the government, of systems. And so I think we have to approach that challenge on both tracks. And something I think about a lot is, and there's layers to this as well about how these financing systems work, but just to kind of generalize, there's affordable housing that anyone can do, private party, nonprofit party, where you get a tax credit to deliver affordable units, and then you have to be in compliance and, you keep the units affordable. And then there's supportive housing. And so that's very different because that's typically working with a nonprofit and they're getting funding to support their tenants, right? And I think a lot of residents get afraid of supportive housing because they think, oh, that's for people that are homeless or people with drug addictions or people, that have other different labels, basically, or problems. Um, but I would almost argue the opposite. If you get an affordable product without support, then you have low income tenants who are facing any number of the items, the health equity pillars we could discuss today, where they're facing challenges and could use support. But those projects are not funded with that funding, right? So it's very nuanced, I think, when you talk about NIMBYism and how to have these conversations within community. And also, what are you talking about when you say affordable?
Can I jump in and just ask to repeat the question? I'm sorry, I'm back again, but can we repeat the
Sure
question?
thing, Essence. Welcome back.
Yeah.
So the question was, what are the biggest structural or policy barriers to safe, stable, and affordable housing in Buffalo or across Western New York?
Okay, so I'll jump in terms of the perspective of a community-based development organization. And a lot of the work that we do in this ecosystem is around either renovating existing structures or building homes and units. And what I'm finding is that it doesn't really pencil out for the nonprofit to actively and functionally participate in state, federal, public funding programs because the margins are so slim. And so this is where it feels like these programs are written to not attract smaller community-based development organizations, and opposed to these larger organizations that might have multi-million dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars in portfolio assets. So it doesn't seem to make sense. And then this is where we need to reach out to our funders, and we've all talked about it, you know, the OSHIs, the community foundations, and those that have identified housing, particularly on the east side, as a critical point and point of care and attention, to really step up and fill the gap, the pre-development cost that it takes to even put together the plan, having an understanding of all of the pieces that are all of the fees and the costs that are not upfront, but underneath once you get into the process can also slow down development. So making these programs more attractive for nonprofits. But then also there seems to be this gray area where smaller developers are not supported in these programs. So a private individual does not have a program where they can apply that I know of, and not abundantly or readily available, where they can apply for public funds to build. Sometimes you have to have a minimum of 4, like the block by block, 4 buildings, you know, not just a single lot where you're looking for a double or a single family home. So I feel like the programs that we have, it goes back to really us creating these programs to fit the communities that we're looking to serve, opposed to taking these top down models and approaches and trying to fit $1 billion, you know, bureaucracy and paperwork all the way into, you know, a $500,000 home build. So yeah, that's what I'm seeing. I would love to see more support on the program side with these public funds.
Thanks, Essence. And, you know, I would add one of the big structural issues around quality of housing, especially as far as existing housing, is, you know, regulation. So ensuring that municipalities are actually inspecting these properties on a regular basis. So the city of Buffalo, for example, up until 2020, it was not regularly inspecting single or double unit rental properties. They didn't have any kind of law about it. If you were living in a building that had 3 or more units, then that was going to be inspected on a regular basis, at least by law. But single or double units, it wasn't going to be inspected unless you as the tenant called 311 and asked for an inspection. But of course, many tenants are afraid to call because they don't want to, you know, damage the kind of relationship that they have with their landlord, because the landlord could just ask them to leave, right? And so this was a big win back in 2020, was that the city of Buffalo created a law to start actually doing these inspections. So every 3 years, the city of Buffalo is supposed to inspect all of these single and double units, which is the majority of rental housing that we have in the city of Buffalo, is these single and double units. It's about 36,000 units. And so this seemed like a huge win at the time, but a couple years went by and we realized that the city of Buffalo was not inspecting at the rate that we would need them to. So instead of taking 3 years to do those inspections, they were going to take 27 years to get done with the first round of inspections. So at that point, you know, what good is that program? It's basically, you know, somebody's probably going to call and get an inspection before the city comes around to actually do the inspection. So we started taking measures that I can talk about in a little while, but just that, you know, we've looked into this at the city of Buffalo level. I'm not sure what this looks like in other municipalities across Western New York, what those requirements are for regulation, but we can't necessarily depend on landlords, especially those who, you know, aren't putting in the effort to make sure that tenants are living in safe, quality housing. We can't necessarily depend on them just to maintain that housing. We have to have local government getting in there and ensuring that units are up to code.
Thanks, Sarah. And where do you all see, you know, racism or bias showing up in housing access or service delivery?
God, I also questions, Kim. Oh my God. It's huge. I mean, it's unfortunate and it's sad, but the racial card is still being pulled. It's almost like the whole deck of cards, because it was so emphatically and methodically placed into the system to keep us out. You're not going to just, wave a magic wand and racism be out of access to homes. It's like you have to go in with the scalpel and look at everything with a microscope from every aspect of home ownership. We talk about just generationally, and growing up with the mindset that you don't own anything and you're not worthy of ownership, and that trickling out into every aspect of life, particularly in home ownership, one of the most abundant and effective ways of generational wealth creation. So when you have a over and over and over generations mindset of not being worth owning anything, and not having a tie to the place and the land that you're in, not feeling connected to your community, you tend not to value the home. Maybe you inherit a home. We find that a lot. A lot of the people on the East Side are just giving up their homes for a bag of cash. They don't feel connected to the community. They don't feel like that home is a tool of wealth generation because they haven't been taught that. They don't see it. They don't know it. So it runs so deep. It's not just, not getting a loan. It's deeper than that, and when we talk about these programs that support us in first-time home ownership and home buying, you have to essentially be poor, in poverty below this level, a 60% AMI, and that's great. We want homes to be affordable, but then there's this gray area where we're not reaching and touching all of the population, especially on the East Side and underserved communities that live, maybe decently, but they don't have the tools that they need or the mindset and understanding of the importance of home ownership. While we have folks that are at the level of 60% AMI, then you get into a home and then you don't have the funding to maintain the home. You can't own it effectively. So there's so many loops to close, and I'm sure everybody has a lot to say about it, but that's a huge question, and it starts with every single aspect of it from start to finish.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think racism and bias really pervades almost every aspect of American life. I mean, you look at the disparities in home ownership and health and employment and income, the list just goes on and on. And again, we were talking about redlining and the consequences, the long-term consequences of those policies. And Maggie mentioned how the Attorney General sued Evans Bank in 2014. Well, you can look at the map that they used to determine where they were going to lend to and not provide loans to. You can overlay that with a redlining map from the 1930s of Buffalo, and it matches up almost perfectly. And that's not by coincidence. So, I would encourage everyone to go to the University of Richmond compiled a great resource. It's called Mapping Inequality. They compiled all the redlining maps from every metropolitan region around the country. And you can go into Buffalo, Pittsburgh, New York. I mean, everywhere you can go and see these maps, and you can zoom in on the individual neighborhoods and see why an area was rated as red, and that was, an area that was too risky to provide any loans to provide any capital to, that the federal government wouldn't underwrite any loans in those areas. So folks couldn't purchase a home, couldn't invest in their home, make major repairs, couldn't invest in a small business. So, why are the neighborhoods in Buffalo today that we see, these consequences of decades of these policies of disinvestment? Why do certain neighborhoods look the way they do? Again, it's those historical reasons why we continue to have the consequences that we see today. And, a lot of folks, even looking at their deeds, they see that racially restrictive covenants written into the deeds of their homes. And, there's efforts now to remove those. I don't support that. I think a better effort is to qualify that with language to say that the owners no longer subscribe to this. This is abhorrent. You know, we certainly support, you know, the right of all folks to be able to live and purchase homes of their choice. So, you know, the ongoing consequences of racism and bias, that they're all around us today. You just have to look at neighborhoods throughout Western New York, and you see it.
I think something, a book that a lot of people in the industry, which is a good thing because I think more people in the industry reading this, the better, like to cite is The Color of Law. Someone could probably, or I'll Google the author and put it in the chat because I can't remember right now. I listened to that book on audio a while ago, and I like dropped everything and tried to find a print copy because I was not shocked, but surprised when I heard that going back to 2008. So again, more recent history. Um, when the predatory lending market was exploding, and that's ultimately what caused the market crash. Thanks, Kim. Um, you know, Buffalo is actually called out as having, I think, the number one market for predatory lending for Black families, for Black individuals in the country prior to the crash. So I was listening to this book probably around 2014. I don't remember when it came out, but at the time, I believe I was hearing some of the reporting on how Buffalo is indeed an affordable city. And I think two people in this room's credit who've produced research to contradict that and highlight the quality of housing as a big issue. Um, Affordable for who, right? If we have the number one predatory lending mortgage market in the country for Black and brown families, who, by the way, might be the first generation of home buyers, right? Based following up on what Essence just was saying, you know, again, and this is not a way that Buffalo wants to be highlighted, but um, it's definitely prevalent in very recent history. And I did just do a little math because that's really what I do all day on kind of AMI and area median income. And Kim shared one of the stats. But if you look up area median income for a family of four in Buffalo, average, it's about $100,000. A Black family in Buffalo is going to have average income of about $60,000. So that's that lingering racial discrepancy, right? Then I did some math because I'm talking a lot about home sale prices these days. And if you translate that average income for a family of four that has $100,000 income, assuming they're spending 30% of that on housing, which is a whole other topic possibly for a different day, the house they're buying is a $414,000 house. Now, that's pretty good for this region. Maybe you couldn't get something in every geography where you're looking, but that would, I would say, could be average. That family of four that's Black or brown with the lower average income, the house they can afford is $200,000. Right? So these are real, and I'm not even talking about subsidies or requirements, right? This is just average for our region. So that is it. They can't even, the house is half of the price, right? These are the real impacts of that income discrepancy. And so I would emphasize income too as a major barrier to be addressing regionally.
I think you all did such a great job covering everything. I don't have a whole ton to add, but another great resource is cityhealthdashboard.com, which I can add in the chat in a minute. But they map out as well a lot of different kind of indicators of health, including, even things like internet access and premature births of kids. And you can pull up on there. It also has the option to look at a redlining map of Buffalo overlaid against all of whatever data it is that you're looking at. And of course, it all lines up in the way that that we would imagine it to, right? And going back to our eviction study in 2020, 2/3 of our interviewees were Black folks, despite, being less than half the population of the city of Buffalo at the time. And even as we're talking about housing and so many other factors, I don't think anybody mentioned this so far, but home assessments being another issue where a bias comes into play. There was a great article, I'll try to find it. I think it was a New York Times article possibly. And they were talking about the issue broadly that, homes owned by people of color, especially Black folks, are undervalued compared to white folks. And they also had some examples specifically where, it was a Black family that owned the home, but they had their white friend act as though, they owned the home when the assessor came. And it was, assessed significantly higher than when it was the Black family inviting the assessor in. So it really does play into every element of our world. And yeah, thanks.
So Kim, and this is great. If I could just jump in just for a second to
Sure thing.
this is great. And so what I want us to do, because we got about 30 minutes left, am I right, Kim? Is really get our panel, because you guys are expert, you have great knowledge, and our whole energy around Igniting Hope 2025 is how we gonna fix this. And so I know you have another question, Kim, but I really want our panelists to really, and like, what are the steps? What do we? Because when we leave the place on the 20th, I want to have some real concrete action steps that we're going to take around each one of these 5 areas, how they interact or what have you, and don't. Oh, okay, appraiser, sure. I mean, so just think about whatever, whatever, and I really want us to, and I don't believe that whatever we put up is not possible. You guys know what needs to do, how we can fix this. And so I want you to just kind of think about that as we craft this next, as we come home on these last 30 minutes. Is that okay, Kim? I know that's the direction we're going. I just needed to really say that again.
Yes. No, you are just in time. We are looking at, cross-section collaboration and strategies. So, I think the next question for everyone is looking at how housing organizations might be collaborating with like public health, legal, or grassroots partners to address root causes, not just those symptoms of housing insecurity.
So because I put in the chat, I'll just say what I wanted to say about appraisers, which I do not think is the most important answer to this question. I just want to say that, but it's definitely part of the system. So I mentioned I work in finance, and when I was working for a nonprofit bank, we actually looked to see if there were any women or people of color appraisers to work with. And the answer is no. Blanket across New York State. I think there might be one minority owned appraisal company. Maybe it's changed a little bit, but this was a couple years ago. So I think diversifying that profession just as an action item is critical. It's a profession that has a very high barrier to entry. They kind of have this like, who do you know who can, it's almost like an apprenticeship model to become a certified appraiser. I would also say, like, from a licensing perspective, real estate agents in New York State at least have to take fair housing and anti-discrimination classes once every 2 years, no matter who you are, no matter how long you've been licensed. Appraisers, to my knowledge, unless they're working for a company or institution that asks them to, don't have to take any kind of racial bias training. They don't have to take any kind of classes on redlining, right? So there's some real education needs in that profession. I didn't mean to hijack it and talk about appraisers, but I definitely wanted to raise that because I do think it's an item that has some actionable follow-up steps. And And this second comment is a little more broad and possibly a little more vague, but I would love to see how others think about this as a strategy. I think that the enforcement of laws as it comes to health and safety and regulations is obviously something that we need to keep pushing on. I think on the other side of the coin, and I heard Essence mention this, when it comes to getting money to fix things and build things, we need to lessen barriers, right? Does that make sense? So I'm not saying we need to give developers tons of money to just go build housing, but I am saying that in general, the tools we have are not going to fix our ecosystem. We don't have enough subsidy. We don't have enough strategies for success or support, to Essence's point. And we certainly don't have enough supply, right? So if we're going to actually like do this, those are kind of 3 S's to focus on.
I agree with that, Maggie. You know, it's always important to take a multi-pronged approach in dealing with things like this, like, you know, changing the government. It's going to be a million years. We're going to keep trying at it. Of course, things change, but it can't be the only way that we go about it, because people are still living. They're still getting sick from the houses, the water, the air that they breathe in their homes. So I advocate and am a big proponent of starting where you're at, you know, starting small and using alternative models like the co-op model. You know, what does it look like when a community comes together and pulls together funding to purchase a home, to renovate one single home, and doing this proof of concept, and a nice influx or an infusion from an OSHI, a community foundation, any other public foundation that's willing to experiment around what it looks like, is always welcome. But I think we need to start really thinking outside of the box, not being afraid to work with alternate building technologies, and understanding what are they doing around the world that is accessible for us here in Buffalo, New York is important. But, you know, let's start with what we have, what's in our backyard, who is in our community, within your family, especially for minority and underrepresented communities. You know, every community outside of the Black community can easily, we find it constantly, they come together, they live together, they support each other, then they break off and support another person in the home or in the family to purchase a home, and they continue to do that. And so we have to start thinking more community wise, family and familial, in terms of using what we have to get what we want, as well as going after ratification, and dealing with the big pushes and the big dragons of government and policy. But we need to be able to start small with the equity that we do have, and proof of concept, you know, I think, especially around co-op housing.
Yeah, I mean, those are all fantastic pieces of the puzzle here. Certainly, you know, I support tenant unions, land trusts, anything where you can really come together with your neighbors to increase, you know, the influence, you know, of your voice and those folks around you. I think we need to continue to push for diversity of experience and background and thought, in virtually, you know, every role, in whether we're talking about government, we're talking about stakeholders, corporations, business leaders. We need to have new, fresh ideas to really have to encourage everyone to come together and work towards a solution here, because just like everyone's saying, you know, this is such a complex, multifaceted problem that you need to attack it from multiple angles. And there's no silver bullet that's just going to solve the problem overnight. You know, it's going to take decades of work. And as far as we've come over the past few decades, we see that much more work remains. So, you know, certainly I encourage everyone to get involved on these issues, and to, you know, hold, you know, the policymakers accountable, and, you know, to push local governments to ensure that there is proper enforcement of the laws that we do have on the books before we even start talking about what laws need to be passed. Well, the laws on the books really don't matter. They're not worth the paper that they're written on if there's not adequate enforcement. And so often, I think part of that just goes along with the idea that, hey, this is the way it's always been. We're not going to change it, and we need to change that that kind of thought as well. We need to realize that we can affect meaningful change in our community.
And one relatively low-hanging fruit, I would say, that the city of Buffalo could do is to opt into good cause eviction legislation. So this is a law that was passed in 2024 at the state level. Originally, it was intended to apply across the state. It's a level of protection for tenants. So if you're a month-to-month tenant, right now you could be asked to leave with as little as 30 days. Good cause would make it such that you cannot be asked to leave unless you were breaking the lease or not paying your rent, or there are certain good causes under the law by which landlords would be able to evict, but it would create this kind of baseline security for tenants as far as, an automatic lease renewal, essentially. But another critical thing that it does is that it stops tenants from being evicted for non-payment when the landlord has just increased the rent significantly. So under this law, the landlords would be able to increase rent a certain amount every year. So for 2024, it's based on the consumer price index and some other things. But in 2024, they would have been able to raise the rent about $80 if it was $1,000 rent. So from $1,000 to $1,084, which, is still more than some tenants could handle. That said, it's not $1,400 or $1,500. So if the landlord tried to raise it to $1,500, you cannot be evicted for not paying $1,500 if your rent was $1,000 under good cause. We don't have it right now because the landlord lobby at the state level got very much involved as it was being passed. It got quite watered down, and they ended up going with this model where municipalities have to opt into it. So that creates like 1,000 different battles that need to happen across New York State to get this put in place, right? But Rochester now has it, Binghamton has it, Albany has it. Many different municipalities have opted in already, and Buffalo could easily do so. So that's something that we're hoping the city will opt into, and something that Push Buffalo, a group here, is really working on this year.
Thanks, everyone. So, getting into some of these strategies and solutions, are there any community-led or place-based solutions that are really giving you hope or show promise?
I heard that collective sigh. I think I collectively, for me, I think that, and I hate to be so so dark and drab, but I think that all of the chaos that we're seeing around housing and around federal cuts, it's waking us up in terms of understanding the urgency of us being able to fight for basic human rights. And I think that is giving me hope. I guess if I had to find something, that it's in the individual person. Like, we all understand that our communities, we cannot wait for the man, if you will, to come in and fix this thing up. Like, it's not going to happen. He's not going to come. And so we need to do it ourselves. And this interior spark of, ownership of our community. What can I do? Pick up a rake, pick up a hammer, who has the skill to do the drywall, who can come together like this. Scrappy, primal energy, I think, is waking up in us in terms of survival. And in that, we'll find community, and we'll find solutions that would be great to be backed up by regulation and law and to make things easier. But I think that we're finding ways to make it work within our communities by using what we have. So.
Yeah, and I think, looking at maybe what some of our young people are thinking about. I recently came across a group of young people trying to form a housing co-op so that they could all get together and buy a building, because they couldn't all individually compete in the housing market, right? So this is a little maybe a different example, coming from a different place, but I think that those um, opportunities are out there, and I think if we can all come together for collective action, but also to help each other, right? I think about the nuances of being a developer, being a landlord, being a tenant, being a community activist. And at the end of the day, we all benefit if the health of our community improves. And if we're all collectively investing in our community. And so I think trying to continue to break down some of those barriers, so that there's not um, in 10 years, the landlord lobby fighting the housing advocate lobby. And so that some of these paths to homeownership that are a little bit more creative are possible. I do think there's hope there. I also think that one of the things that is challenging to overcome is just time itself, right? Because people move, they get older, they have kids, right? People's priorities change in community, and just continuing to build that movement and have some, connectivity across the generations, I think gives me hope. So.
I'll add one more thing, is AI. I think that AI is moving into everything. And if we have a attitude about it that is open to it, especially in professions like architecture, and we think about the AI, the Google glasses that contractors and construction professionals can wear. I mean, AI in terms of the expertise in the professional areas all around development is really breaking down barriers, I think, for people that largely don't have access to, the elite schools, or it wasn't a part of their profession in growing up. They didn't see people in their family with these jobs and these careers around building and building community. So it's definitely breaking barriers in terms of the education of the industry, but then also the actual operation in building. I think that we need to embrace AI more and more.
Can also add, just to build on something that Dan had said a while ago, he touched on community land trusts as a model. So for folks who don't know, community land trusts are a way for folks to purchase housing, but it remains affordable forever, essentially. So usually how it works is a nonprofit would own the land that the house is on, but the house itself is purchased by someone, usually somebody with income such that they couldn't necessarily buy on like the open market, but they could purchase this subsidized home. And the reason that the land is owned by the nonprofit is because then the nonprofit can restrict the amount of profit that can be made on that home. And so some people are concerned about that. They say, well, people need to be able to like make a profit on their home. That's the whole point of generational wealth, to pass on this wealth. And that can still happen within a community land trust, because the folks who purchase the home and then go to sell it later, they are able to make a significant profit. It's just slightly reduced than what they would get on the open market, because that means that somebody else who otherwise couldn't afford a house on the open market can purchase that house. So in that way, the land trust takes in subsidies to make these homes originally kind of affordable when they first start out, and then it's continuously affordable over time. And also the nonprofits themselves are governed in majority by people who live in those homes and people who live in the larger neighborhood is usually how they're modeled. And so there's kind of neighborhood level decision making about how this all happens. And because there's some level of involvement with people who own the homes, they have to pay like I think it's like it depends place to place, but say it's like a $5 monthly fee or something to be a part of this. because of that, the group is able to tell if somebody is, struggling to pay their mortgage, for example. And so during the 2008 financial crisis, there were far fewer mortgage defaults among folks who were using community land trust homes as opposed to homes outside of community land trusts. So, and they exist in many places too. And we did have one in Buffalo for a little while. I'm not sure what the status of it is anymore. But this is kind of a proven model that's been used in many other places that we could definitely build on here.
Thanks, everyone. So just sort of staying on the same topic in terms of solutions, when we think about services like housing navigation or legal support, home repairs, any of those, thinking about how those can play a part in preventing displacement or deepening the health equity for folks.
Yeah, I can speak to some of those issues. I mean, we help folks find safe, quality, affordable housing every day. And, that ability to navigate our housing market, it's so challenging. And, to be able to provide that assistance, to be able to, take folks out to certain neighborhoods so they can see what the neighborhood looks like, talk to their prospective housing provider. They can see, okay, is there a grocery store, down the street? And then to be able to provide that ongoing assistance to ensure that they're able to stay in their new home, stably housed for the long term. And providing the support sets, everything from financial literacy, nutritional literacy, that legal support if there's any issues with their landlords. Sometimes we can help to mediate those issues as well. So you're talking about some of the things that we're really kind of looking towards in terms of victories. It's those small victories. It's helping somebody to find a safe, quality, affordable place to live where they're able to reach their full potential. It's wonderful to see, and the long-term benefits that accrue to those individuals. That's what really keeps me going, seeing those kind of benefits. So yeah, certainly looking more towards that in the future.
I think even just based on this conversation tonight and all the different facets that have been touched on, I think thinking about some sort of platform where some of these amazing links that have been shared tonight, and also just kind of basic, like, what do groups do, um, and how can different groups help different people, right? Kind of have that asset mapping for the ecosystem, because it's so vast. And there's so many components, right? So, and this isn't even related to work, but there's a woman who lives on my street who needed help finding an attorney to help her with her housing situation. And I work in this industry. I have friends that work at Push. I have friends that work at neighborhood legal services. And I was having trouble finding her the right phone number. So I think just having a platform perhaps where we could all kind of share resources, and tools, whether it's helping your neighbor find an attorney to prevent an eviction, or talking to the village of Depew about smart growth, right? Like, the tools could be vast. But if we could have a kind of a collaborative toolbox, I think that would be really cool.
Talking about solutions, I would like to see it start in the schools. We all talk about why don't we learn about finance at a young age, and budgeting and things of that nature. But teaching home ownership, having people, students in high school and college understand what is a healthy home, what does that look like. A lot of people don't even realize what kind of condition they're living in, because it's just been a part of their lives for generations. And so education starting from a young age, tying young people to the community and understanding the benefits of home ownership. And then also moving into high school and college, you know, getting their credit together, preparing them for home ownership, so that they can compete in the market. We talked about just the incomes in and of themselves are prohibitive from living in a way that is of quality, at least it's a typical standard level quality. So education, absolutely. And then current homeowners, educating them on, like Maggie says, what is out there, what's available, and what does a healthy home look like? What are your rights? There should be a library, a clearinghouse, if you will, that can be a one-stop shop for people to understand the importance of what we're talking about and to their health.
Yeah, one more thing that I would think would be really helpful is, you know, a fund for some landlords obviously are just not caring about conditions, want to make the most profit possible, and therefore aren't making repairs, and they should have to pay for those repairs, right? But there are certainly other landlords who, yeah, say they inherited the home, they're just using the rent money to pay the mortgage, like they don't have thousands of dollars to make home repairs. It would be nice to have some kind of revolving loan fund to address repairs that need to be made for the tenant's benefit, when, you know, otherwise that unit would fall through the cracks of existing kind of funds that are available otherwise.
And I think last question before we open it up, if you could redesign the local housing system with health equity in mind, what would be your top priority?
I'd like to see it go back into the hands of the community, the block clubs. It would be nice if we could be creative around the HOA model, you know, where HOAs have this protective bubble that they create, and it's legally backed, and it supports the value of their homes. Maybe it's not an affordable situation, but it would be nice if that was somehow adopted in communities through block clubs to some degree, where we're giving the blocks more ownership of their block, and support. You know, a block club maybe can form an entity that could receive some of those funds that Sarah was talking about, or being able to have access to to liquidity, to funding in order to maintain their homes, having a standard on their block about the maintenance of the home, and things of that nature, where they can fight for appraisals and things of that nature that are unfair. I would like to see something that gives block clubs a little more of a stake and weight in home ownership and affordability of their neighborhood.
Hey, it's Luann Brown from Buffalo Prenatal. Sorry, I've been multitasking in and out, but I heard most of the conversation. And Sarah, if I've worked on this, and I'm sure some of those families were my families. Certainly when the Attorney General had the press conference about the 14 kids with the lead poisoning, I'm sure those were some of the kids from Buffalo Prenatal. And I always tell people, I would just love, I don't want to manage it, I would just love a building where I could put my moms and kids and them not be, you know, and be healthy and not be worried about going home. You know, you talk about the fear of the inspections, you know, we have a process in place where we, you know, we arrange with the inspector, and my community health worker goes with them so that they'll open the door. But there is that fear because they'd rather have a roof over their head. I mean, we're involved right now with the 1115 Medicaid waiver, and, you know, regardless of what you think about it, I just put 8 moms in homes, which, I mean, it was like life-changing for them. I mean, paid their rent, paid their security deposit, got them the things they needed. So I don't understand why this has festered for years and years. And I'll just tell you that my staff that deal with it every day, I mean, it's frustrating to them. It's frustrating to me. And I just can't believe nobody can figure this out. That's all I got to say about it. But it's the bane of, I mean, anybody I can bitch to, I bitch to, I'll tell you about it. Because I'm just tired of it. And I'm, you know, my staff sends me videos with, you know, these rats and the mold and it's just ridiculous. I mean, again, most developed country, and we can't fix this problem.
One thing I would add that I think kind of gets to that point, Luann, is, when we're talking about what would be our top priorities, I think one thing is focusing on decommodification of housing, because I think one big thing that's really driven us to this point is that housing is a commodity right now in most cases. And when, the owners of that housing are looking to profit off of the housing, like, how can we be sure that quality is really going to be maintained, and that folks who live in those properties are going to have a say over how it works. So I think looking at these models like community land trusts and other social housing forms, where the properties are coming off the market, it's not up to the market to maintain the quality of the housing. It's really kind of outside of that, where we can focus on maintaining it, making sure it's a good place for people to live in.
That's a far more intelligent way to say the wild thing I was going to say, which is get rid of real estate investment trusts. Like, if I could wave a magic wand, right? Kind of start at the top. But I also think I love Essence's focus on community. And I think about this a lot as it relates to who are the people that own the buildings, inspect the buildings, regulate the policies. And I would just like to see more women in charge, because women are thinking about things like lead paint more often, just by nature, right? And like, as a mom, I'm like, how do we have a system where the signal for a problem is a blood test on a baby, right? So these are kind of very like broad based kind of crazy answers, but if we had a magic wand, it would be decommodifying housing, transportation. I mean, I don't think we can really talk about affordable housing these days without talking about transportation and access. So I think that would be another magic wand that would be fun to wave. And also just empowering more women and people of color to make better decisions.
So I know we're coming to the end, Kim, and let me just say this, that we are the magic wand. And I really want you to hear this, everyone, that I have a lot of confidence in you. The people on our panel, the people on our teams that you have at the Buffalo Center and our other partners, and the people in this community. I've worked with Sarah on things and whatever. In essence, you know me. I believe that we can transform this system. And so it's just a matter of us being intentional, being focused, having a plan, and then holding not only others accountable, holding ourselves accountable, but also, the people that we spend time electing and all these other things. And, public money is our money. It doesn't belong to investors. It doesn't belong to the developers. That we are the public. And so I'm really encouraged by what we've heard tonight. If for those of you, we're coming up to our community day and igniting hope, and we're gonna figure out solutions to this stuff, and then we're gonna be accountable at the Buffalo Center for Health Equity to provide the leadership to assemble this strategic plan. We've engaged Clementine Gold and their technical expertise. And
Sorry, before we
Pastor,
before we wrap up, I just wanted to acknowledge that Paul's had his hand up for a little bit. I wanted to make sure he got an opportunity to
I'm sorry,
ask his
Paul.
question before we leave for tonight. So I didn't want to get you too wrapped up in your wrap up before we dismiss.
Well,
so
that
Paul,
is the wrap up. So we'll give Paul the last word, and then Kim, you can just whatever logistics. And thank you, panel. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. My question, hi, my name is Paul Land. I'm a CPS worker for child protection. I've been a social worker in different fields for about 10 years. And I've seen housing crisis and done some research on my master's project on how income inequality. My question is, how have you seen, or what have you seen? Has it always been an instability for the housing crisis over the years, maybe last 10, 20 years? Has it always been that and it's just been swept under the rug? And the second part to that question is, what can people like myself do to help make change? The average person, what is our duty in society? I want to, take part and give back somehow. So what can we do to give back or to make change as well?
Yeah, I mean, these issues are historic, and Paul, I would just invite you to, come be with us on Igniting Hope weekend and help us assemble. Your input is as important and as valuable as anybody else's, and help us get our collective minds together to figure out some approaches to make things better. So come in and contribute, and we'll figure this stuff out together.
Awesome.
right.
Well, Paul, we will look forward to seeing you and the other folks on this call next weekend. We just wanted to thank everyone, our amazing panelists, the Buffalo Center for Health Equity. Pastor has been here pastoring. Just everything has been fantastic. If you have questions, please reach out. Sam has dropped info in the chat, but everyone have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.